Hi, in today's video I'm going to be doing a review of Nixos as your daily driver. Now I've been using Nixos for about 2 weeks and I just wanted to cover a few of the issues that I've come across, why you might want to give it a look. What I'm also going to be doing is covering a few general Linux tips that you can use on any Linux distribution. For example, how do you remove the new Firefox Unified Extension button that you get up here? So what I'm going to do is go through some of the pros and cons of using Nixos and some of the issues I've come across and a few little tweaks that I found that will make it better. So basically, Nixos is a Linux distribution that has a completely different file system layout from any other distribution that allows it to sort of keep things compartmentalized in their own directories. So the dependencies for all applications are stored in a single sort of directory so they don't interfere with each other. And the way you sort of set Nixos up is by obviously reading the manual. And you've got two ways to do it. It's got a graphical installer, or you can do it on the command line. But the end result is the same. What you end up with is two configuration files, a configuration.nix and a hardware.nix. Is it hardware configuration.nix? But basically these two files control how the system is built. And then what you have is another application called Home Manager that you can use to install all your packages and configure your desktop and apply a lot of settings that you do manually. So what I'm going to do is actually switch across and come across to Emacs over here. And what I'll just do is open my root configuration. So what we've got here is we've got configuration and hardware configuration.nix. So hardware configuration.nix is a file that contains a lot of information about the sort of file system that you've set up and the processor type, all that kind of stuff. And what you do in here that I covered in the previous system is once you set this up, it's going to use UIDs, but you can change it to use labels instead for the file system so that it's reproducible. I covered this in a lot of depth in the previous video, so what I'm going to do is just come across to some general tips that I've come across with the configuration.nix. Nixos actually has the ability to do an automatic upgrade. And what I'm going to do is cover that here. So what we've got down here is this section, system auto upgrade equals enable true, dates daily, allow reboot false. And what this does is this will check there's newer kernel versions, that sort of thing. And it will create a new generation so that when you reboot in Grub, what will happen is it will boot into this new generation. Now, one note I want to mention is here, this allow reboot equals false. You don't want to set that to true because otherwise it's going to automatically reboot. So you could set this to run at 4 o'clock in the morning, for example, and automatically reboot. But what I would recommend is setting this to not reboot automatically, because you could be working and it's just going to reboot on you, which you don't want. And what this will do with allowed reboot equals false is it will create a configuration file that will be applied on the next reboot. So that's the best way to do the auto upgrade. You can set dates to be a time or daily, weekly, and as I said, it will basically create this new configuration file, and next time you boot into Nixos, it will automatically boot into the new generation with the updates. What we've also got here is garbage collection. So this will automatically delete generations older than a week so that it keeps your system clean, because Nixos can take up a lot of space because it uses different generations. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to mention in the configuration. Let me just see if there's anything else that I've added to the configuration. I covered transmission in a previous video. I think that's pretty much everything I've changed in the configuration. What I'm going to do is actually come across to my doc files for Nixos. So this is a org document containing all the settings for Home Manager, Emacs, and all the applications I use. And one thing I wanted to mention is I've actually switched to the Alacrity terminal. And I tried to build Alacrity previously on Ubuntu, and I got it to work once, manually installed it with Rust, and then I did a driver update for my Nvidia graphics card and it stopped working. So I've got Alacrity installed, and it's absolutely fantastic, really fast, and I've never used it before because I could just never get it to run. So what I want to actually do is cover some things I've actually changed on Nixos, and one of them is actually managing all my packages for Emacs with Home Manager. And the reason why you might want to do that is because it allows you to, let me come into here. So normally in Emacs, for example, what you do is, package install. What will happen is if I come into my config, let's go into an old one actually, git ubuntu doc files, big Emacs. So normally what happens is when you install stuff with package install in Emacs, what it's going to do, unless you're using something like use package, it's going to create this variable called package selected packages with the list of packages that you've actually installed. And then when you move to another system, you can actually just start up Emacs and it will say, do you want to install all these packages? What I found was that I was frequently having errors saying it couldn't find Magic, it couldn't find Evil Collection. Just had a lot of, I don't know why, but I was just having a lot of issues with packages not being updated properly, and then if they were, I had to go around and fix stuff. So what happens now, instead of using Emacs to manage packages, I'm actually managing them all through Home Manager. And what we've got here is this block of code here: programs Emacs enabled, packages equals unselected packages, Emacs PKG, extra packages, EPKGs with EPKGs, and then a list of all the Emacs packages that I use. And what I found is this is a lot more stable than actually installing them manually. As I said, I was frequently having to fix stuff, packages not being installed properly, even though they're in the package list. So what I've got down here is a list of all the packages I use. So rather than actually having to manually update the packages, package update all, to update all the packages and then go around and fix stuff, when I boot into Nixos, I don't have any commands to actually sort of go through and update stuff manually. Normally what I'd have to do is run sudo apt update, sudo apt upgrade, excuse me, and then maybe, check if there's a new version of the snaps for Firefox. You do a sudo snap refresh to see if there's any snap updates, then you do a Flatpak update to see if there's any update for Flatpak, and then I'll do an update for all my Emacs packages. Now all I do is run Home Manager switch and everything's updated, including my browser extension. So this is how you can actually install packages for Emacs using Home Manager, and in my opinion it's a lot more stable. When you open up Emacs, you don't have to go and check if there's any updates. You can just run Home Manager switch and everything gets updated. So that's the first thing, is I've switched to actually having all my packages managed by Home Manager. Okay, let's have a look down here, see if there's anything else I've done there. Yeah, one issue I have come across with Alacrity is there's a bug where sometimes the cursor disappears, and this specifically happens if you're playing MPV on another screen. MPV will hide the cursor, and then when you move it back to Alacrity, it's still hidden. And this is supposed to be the fix, is setting the X cursor theme to the name of the theme you're using. I'm still having a slight issue with it, so I'm not sure that's fixed it completely. So that's one issue there. So what you can actually do with Home Manager is you can actually set variables. So you've actually got two ways of doing this. You've got systemd variables, which would usually go in environment.d in your config directory. I can't remember what the name of the file is offhand. But these are for variables that be used by Wayland. So things like your SSH authentication socket, that sort of thing, your display. But what you can also do is set home session variables. And these are variables that typically you might put in your bash RC or something, or your ZSH RC. And this allows you to set session variables, you know, X cursor theme, the theme you're using, that sort of thing. So that's another new thing I've come across that's quite useful. GTK, now this is really useful here, XDG directories. I've actually covered this in a previous video. If I switch across to my file manager here, the regular file manager, normally what you'll see on a stock install of Gnome is that you'll have a public and a templates folder directory. And this is actually controlled by a file that is, let me just switch back here. Dot config. I think it's because it's managed by Home Manager. It's not actually there. See if I've got it in another one, or let me just search for it. Remind myself of the name. Just bear with me a second. XDG directories. XDG directories. Public and templates. So there was actually a file, I think it's called .dir something or other. Come on, ArchWiki. Yeah, so the file is actually called user-dir.dirs. I'm going to see if I've actually got that. .config user. Yeah, here we go. So by default, yours won't look like this. This is just because it's managed by Home Manager. But what you will actually see is in your .config user-directories.dir is a list of XDG desktops directories. Like, let me just zoom that in a bit for you. So what you've got is desktop directory equals home, desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures, public, templates, videos. Simply what you can do is actually edit this configuration file and actually remove these two. Once you've done that, what will happen is you can then delete those directories and they're not going to automatically be recreated. If you were just to delete the public and templates directories, every time you reboot, they would just reappear. And that's because they are controlled by this file here, this .config user-dirs.dirs file. So what this will allow you to do is actually change the names of the directories. So if you wanted your desktop to be called fucknuts, you could. So you could just change that to home fucknuts, and that would be your desktop. So you can remove any of these, you can change the paths on these. So this would allow you to do something like, if you wanted to keep your music directory on a separate drive, you could do that. Same with the pictures, or just remove any of the ones you don't want. And in Nixos, in my .config nixpkg's home.nix file, which is the configuration file for Home Manager. What we've got here is this block of code: xdg equals user directories equals enable equals true, create directories true, public share null, templates null. And basically what that does is that's exactly the same as editing that .user-dir.drs file and removing those directories. But the advantage of doing it this way is that the settings are going to be applied when you actually set up your system, rather than you having to manually go through and think, oh god, I've got to now edit that configuration file, remove those directories, rather than having to go through and manually do things like that. You know, go through, edit the file, go through, delete the directories. You just set this up and those directories won't actually be created when you build the system. Or if you actually already built the system and then you add this option and then run Home Manager switch, you can just delete those public share and templates directory. When you reboot, they're not going to be recreated. So that's one tip that I've come across that's really useful, because the advantage of Nix is all these settings that you might not think of when you're actually, you know, setting up a system. You can apply. So normally what happens is you think, oh, I just got to, you know, set up a system, put my dot files in, I'm good to go. But then you realize, oh, you've got to configure the desktop, you've got to set up the browser, you've got to go through and edit all these little configuration files, and it's difficult to keep a track of. So the advantage of this is it forces you to actually keep a note of all the changes you've made, and then allows you to reapply them on another system. So that's really useful. I covered MPV in a previous video. I don't think there's anything else I've added here, but what I wanted to do is actually come through and go through some of the tweaks I've made to using NixOS compared to when I was using Ubuntu. So what I've also done is actually switched from the ZSH shell to Bash. And the reason for that is because on ZSH, I was finding that I wasn't getting auto-completion for commands that were prefixed with sudo that were in my path. So what I mean by that is I have in my bin directory a load of scripts here. And some of these I run with sudo, so like for the VPN. So I've got a script that sets up a VPN called VPN root. So if I run, you can see here I'm in bash, so echo shell run current system swbin bash, which is actually the location of bash on NixOS. And now if I run sudo and then VPN, it's auto-completing for those shell scripts that are in my home bin directory. So when I was running ZSH, what I'd have to do is actually have to manually type out the full path to the script to actually run it. I couldn't get auto-completion working for commands prefixed with sudo, and what would typically happen, I don't know if this is a NixOS issue, is that it wouldn't be able to find files that it should that were in the path. So things like general commands like mount or IP, system commands, I couldn't get them to run properly with ZSH. Maybe something I'd done, but it was not an issue I'd had on Ubuntu. But when I was using Ubuntu, I'd put shell scripts in user local bin, but there's no user local bin on NixOS. So that's why I have all my shell scripts in one directory in my home, including scripts that I run with sudo. So that was just another thing that I come across, is that bash seems to be a lot less hassle to actually set up and get working with commands like sudo. You can see I've got my prompt back up here. You know, everything's pretty much the same. I don't have some things like, you know, colored auto completion, but that's not really an issue. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention with bash, and what I'll just do is come through my bash config. So what we got down here is we've got our bash RC profile and input RC. So if I come into my bash RC, oops, can I get this to go larger? So this is just the default bash RC, and what we got here down here is we're setting our PS1. So now, one thing I wanted to mention about Nixos is by default it has a but ugly prompt for bash. What happens by default is it will have this big long yellow prompt, and it has an extra line underneath it. So what I mean by that is the default prompt, if I run that here, you can see it's listing out everything, and that's the last line, and then the prompt comes down here. The default prompt for bash uses a bright yellow string, and it has an extra line of white space after every command. So when you'd run a command, what would happen is you'd have an extra line of white space and then the prompt, and it's just really ugly. But thankfully, all you need to do to actually fix that is set your PS1 in your bash RC or ZSHRC if you're using it, and that will sort of fix the issue. But as I said, it's just mainly an issue on the bash side of things. So this is how we set our PS1 prompt, and as you can see here, we've got user at host, and then the path, and then a new line, and then yes master. So you can see here we've got user at, and then the desktop, the actual link. And the reason I prefer a 2-line prompt is because what that means is the prompt is always going to be in the same position. Typically with a 1-line prompt, what will happen is the further you get into a directory structure, the further along your prompt's going to be. So if you're in a really long directory, your prompt can end up halfway across the screen, which is really annoying. So that's why I like a 2-line prompt. And there's no issues I've come across using this with anything like Emacs, because sometimes you can get issues with the prompt layout with Emacs and applications like Tramp not being able to properly process your password if you've got a funny prompt. Just finished the tea off. So that's another thing to set in there. Let me just see if there's anything else that I've added to this. So these were just this stuff down the bottom is actually stuff that was added by Nix PKGs, which is what's Home Manager uses to set stuff up. So we've got a lot of basic stuff in here, exporting the MPD host, the Git pager, XDG directories, that sort of thing. Nothing too major, but I just wanted to show you the prompt. So the next one we've got down here is our profile. And so all we've got in here is this section, if bash version, include bash RC if exists. And this section down here, set path, so it includes the user's private bin directory if it exists. So this is my home.bin directory with all my scripts in. So this adds it to the path. So as you see, if I do echo path, you'll see we've got home, my username, bin, and it's actually doing it twice, annoyingly. I'm not sure why that is. I'll have to see why that's being picked up twice. That's a bit annoying. So I have to see why that's getting picked up twice, but that's how you can add it to your your bin directory to your bash setup. And then we've got the input RC. What we've got down here is things like, these are just the couple of sections I've added down here. Completion, ignore case. So what that does is, if I want to go to desktop, for example, yeah, I type desktop lowercase, that's going to be accepted. If that's off, you're going to manually have to type capital D for desktop. And then we've got tab for auto completion down there. So those are the three things I've got set up for my bash RC. One I'll go through is Alacrity. Next, have a quick look at Alacrity. So this is the Alacrity terminal. And first of all, what I do is actually set the term to xterm 256 color. And the reason for that is because Alacrity by default uses its own term file. And if you try and SSH into another machine, it's probably not going to have the term file for Alacrity. And so when you start typing stuff, it's going to go all over the place. And you have really weird issues with, when you press something, it's going to repeat the key multiple times, or, you press space and it'll do umpteen spaces, that sort of thing. So setting the term to xterm 256 color for Alacrity solves that issue by using the xterm, they're called, forget what they're called, it's got a configuration file, systems have got a configuration file where they store all the term files for different terminals, and xterm will be listed on basically pretty much anything, so you're good to go. So the other option, if you don't want to change the term file from Alacrity, is that what you can do is you can actually use Tmux. So you can start up Tmux on your local machine, and actually let me just show you the Tmux config briefly. .config Tmux. What you'll see in Tmux down here is, in Tmux what I do is I set the default terminal to xterm 256 color. And what this will let you do is, you're running Tmux here, you run Tmux here, and then you SSH into another machine. So you could have, if you're not running in Tmux and you've not changed the term in Alacrity, the term will be Alacrity. But then when you switch to Tmux, we echo term, you can see it's xterm 256 color. So basically what you do, if you don't want to change the term in Alacrity, you change it in Tmux to 256 color. You run Tmux on your local machine, and then you SSH into another machine. And because you're running Tmux, it will report the term as xterm 256 color, and you won't get any weird issues with Alacrity SSHing into another machine. So that's a tip for Alacrity that I just wanted to cover. Let me come back into here. Now, next thing we've got down here is window padding. So what this allows you to do is actually set a bit of window padding inside Alacrity. So if I just come out of Tmux here, what you should see is here there's a tiny bit of padding. There's 4 pixels of padding. So by default, what will happen is this text would be right butted up against the top on the left. So we can set a bit of padding there so it's not, quite so jarring. So that's another thing. The next step down here is startup mode full screen. So if I come across here and let's just close this, if I narrow down my keyboard shortcut for Alacrity, you'll see it opens full screen here. Can I get this to, how do I get this out of full screen? Okay, there we go. So there were actually a couple of weird bugs with Alacrity. So you can see the cursor's not come back, and it's kind of disappearing. This was the issue I was mentioning. You can see also that the title bar is kind of like half visible. And there are a couple of issues with Alacrity that have actually come across running on Wayland. Specifically things like the cursor disappearing, as you can see here, the header not showing up properly. And now if I put this back to full screen, another issue is if I try and go push up on the keyboard like you would normally, if I come across to here, if I push up on the keyboard, was it pull down on the keyboard? Pull down on the keyboard. If it's doing it on this one, no, it's working, but sometimes when you're in full screen, you can get some kind of weird issues as well. For example, when you first start up, let's see if I can trigger this bug. If I bring the monitor back like this, and then I run keyboard shortcut, can you see what happens? It's trying to put Alacrity full screen, but the background there's gone black. So when you pull out into kind of like activities view and you put Alacrity full screen, you'll get this weird bug where Alacrity won't actually go full screen into the desktop there. It'll come up with a black desktop and then that, like that. So that's a bit weird. So that's just another Alacrity bug, and I think this is just generally something that happens with Rust applications on Wayland. But what I found is that you can start Alacrity up in various modes, full screen, maximize. The other issue is if you run maximized with Alacrity, what will happen is you would think maximized would be maximized width and maximized height. What seems to happen is when you set Alacrity to be maximized, it'll be maximized to the width, but not the height. So you get a half screen Alacrity coming up. So that's why I would recommend setting the startup mode for Alacrity to full screen, as this resolves some of the issues that I've sort of come across and tried to show you. So as long as you're not in this mode when you set you launch Alacrity and you launch it like that, it'll be fine. If you're in activities mode and you do that, that will happen. All right, okay. So that's kind of an Alacrity issue. Next thing we got down here is the font config. I'm using Fira code, so I'm just setting the font config there. This is the solarized theme, and that's basically my Alacrity setup. So there's only a couple of things in there, setting the term, the window padding, and the startup mode, and the others are basically cosmetic. So that's Alacrity. That's some of the bugs that I've come across with it and Wayland. So what I'm going to do is come across to Firefox now. So as I was mentioning, by default, Firefox, the new version, has got this thing called the Unified Extensions button. And it's basically a little button that shows up in your toolbar with a list of all the other extensions that you haven't got here. So what I'll do is I'll just switch across to add-ons and what was it? Add-ons and themes, or was it custom? No, it's customized toolbar. So we click somewhere. Where can we click? I need to click customized toolbar. Okay, so what happens is when you've got lots of extensions, they'll actually, and you haven't got them pinned up here, they'll show up in this section. And as you can see, what we've got down here is these two chevrons, and this is the overflow menu. And this is important. So what I'm going to do is actually take you through the settings for getting rid of that new button, and a couple of things you've got to do. So what we're going to do is come into our Firefox config here. So what this is this is a Nix file that controls how Firefox is built. I covered this in a previous video, and this is amazing. What it allows you to do is set up Firefox completely. You can disable Pocket, you can disable telemetry, all the extensions that you would all the things that you would normally come through and set up in Firefox. Normally in Firefox, you're going to come through and you're going to go to settings, and you're going to go through all these options, you know, change them, go through all these, change all these options, you know, set new tabs to be a blank page without all the Pocket stuff. You know, normally when you open up Firefox, got a big search bar, these shortcut tabs, all this Pocket stuff. You can set all that to be disabled. So what we're doing in this file here is we're disabling some of the things like Firefox Studies, Pocket, telemetry. We're actually installing extensions as well. So rather than actually manually having to go through and, as you would normally do, you'd come through and, you know, what you'd have to do, add-ons and extensions, and you'd search for an extension and you'd manually install it. What you can do with this is actually build Firefox and have it automatically loaded with the extensions. The only thing is you actually have to manually enable them, and that's just a security feature so that people can't maliciously sort of, you know, load extensions willy-nilly into Firefox. So this will kind of set up Firefox with these extensions pre-installed, and then you just have to enable them. And what we've got down here, this section down here, this is the config. So normally in Firefox, what happens is, you know, you come through and you want to change something, you want to remove a button or change an option. And what you have to do is go into About, Config, and say, you know, like tab. You search for something, you go through, and you have to go through and you change all these options manually. So that's annoying, but what you can do is you can create a user.js file and store all of those settings in it. But the problem with that is that you've actually got to go and put it in the Firefox profile directory. So you've then got to kind of like open up Firefox and go show me the profiles directory and copy the file across and restart Firefox. That's really annoying. So what we can do with Nix and Home Manager, Home Manager can work on any version of Linux, any Linux distribution or Mac OS X. You can actually set up Firefox and actually set it up so that this section, what it's going to do is it's actually going to create the .user.js file with all these settings inside them. So this is the same as you going through and manually doing about config, you know, dozens of times and changing all these options, or putting it in the user.js file. But as I said, that's got an issue because you've got to do it manually. What this allows you to do is set up Firefox with all the options you want already configured. So what I'm going to do is come across to unified extensions. So this is the secret sauce that will remove the button. What you need to do, if I come across here, copy this, we'll go into this. So as you can see here, what we've got is this section, extensions.unified extensions enabled, and by default this is going to be true. So what you can do is, let me see if I can go through and change that back to true, and what I'll do is I'll open a new window. So what you're going to typically end up with is this thing here, okay? This extensions thing. And what this does is this shows you all the extensions that aren't pinned up here. And we don't want that. We want to get rid of it. So what we do is the following. Extensions, you can go into About Config, put this in, change it to false. Okay? Now, you open it up. And what I need to do is actually come across Customize Toolbar. And I'm going to see if I've got, where's one of those things. Haven't got any bloody, there's Vimium. So what I'm going to do is put Vimium into the overflow menu. Right. So once you do that, unified extensions enabled false, you'd think that'd be it, gone. But then you open a new window and you find that that button has been replaced by this. the overflow menu. So what we've done is we've disabled one button and replaced it with another. Great, that's not really much progress, but you can get rid of this. So this is what you need to do. So first of all, extensions unified enabled false. Right, open a new window and then you'll find you got this chevron. This is the overflow menu. So what you do is just come across down here, customize toolbar, drag it out, click done, and it's gone. So that's how you actually get rid of the unified extensions button. It's a couple of steps process. You disable it, it replaces it with the overflow menu. You then go into customize toolbar, you drag all those icons out of the overflow menu, and then the button disappears. So as you can see, that's gone. So what this does is this allows me to keep track of all those tweaks I make to Firefox and keep them in one place. And then when I build Firefox, when I run Home Manager switch, what it's actually going to do is apply all those settings for me. So I don't have to go through and look for the profile directory and copy a user, a user JS file across. The difficulty with that is you've got to do it manually, and it's very difficult to keep these things up sync. You can't. There's no way to do it automatically because the profile directory's name is different on every Firefox build. So rather than open the profile directory, copying across manually, and then you might make a change in that setting, and then you go across to another machine and you haven't made the change there. So what this allows me to do is keep all those settings for Firefox in one place and then just apply them. What we've also got is user Chrome, and this allows us to apply CSS tweaks to the Firefox interface to do things like remove a lot of the buttons we get. So in Firefox, in the menu, typically you'll get loads of buttons when you can see here. If I right click, I've just got inspect and block element. So you can see I've got a really minimal contextual menu here, removing a lot of the things I don't need. And this is done with the user Chrome.css. And again, you can do this manually, but the problem is you have to open the Firefox profile directory. You've got to create a Chrome. There's two things you've got to do. You've actually got to enable legacy style sheets in the user.js file. Then you've got to create a Chrome directory, and then you've got to put the CSS files in that Chrome directory, and it's a pain. What this allows me to do is have all those CSS settings applied actually when I set up Firefox, so that it will automatically remove all these items from the Firefox contextual menu. So that's really, really useful. So that's a sort of Firefox tip on how to get rid of that unified extensions thing and various ways you could do it. And I would actually say that using Nix PKGs and Home Manager, which again, you can do this on any version of Linux, this is by far, without a doubt, the best way to set up Firefox, period. There is nothing else that comes close to offering the level of customizations that you can just apply without having to do loads of donkey work yourself. So, as I said, normally you think, set up a new system, just do my dot files. Then you forget, I've got to go through and do Firefox. I've got to come through, disable Pocket. I've got to install all my extensions, do all these different tweaks. And it's difficult to keep track of them all, So doing this allows you to have all the settings in one place and have them all applied, so that you've got a lot less work to do when actually setting up Firefox. So most of this is all automatically set up. So there are a few things I had to do, like putting up the unified, setting 2 search bars there, and that's just because I couldn't find the the option to actually do it in the config. So that's a couple of sort of tips. Let me go through and see if there's anything else that I've sort of changed here. I think that's pretty much most of the sort of things that I've gone through. And what I've also done is, if I come into my bin directory, is I've been going through and I've been changing all these scripts. I had a few scripts that were actually bash scripts. So what I want to do, show you, is there is no bin bash on Nix. You've got Nix, you've got bash installed, but the shebang is different. So if we look in bin, we've got one file, we've got the sh. So we've got bin sh, but no bin bash. And the way you do that is by, you'd be running user bin environment bash, I think it is. User bin, was it you? I forget what the thing is, but basically what I was going to say is what I've been doing is actually just going through and changing all my scripts that were bash to shell scripts. And this is one I covered in a previous video on setting up transmission. I think I need to change a couple of things. I need to change. See, this is fly check, so let's just go through and fix those little errors. And I think the other one was to do with quoting. So believe that it will want these quoted. Yeah, there we go. So that's fixed that error. So I'll just push that. So this is the transmission PW gen script that I covered in a previous video on setting up transmission on NixOS, and basically what I've just done is fixed all the errors and changed it. So in the original script, it was a bash script, and what it was doing, it was catting udev random and then piping it into tr, and basically what I've done is just swapped it around, so it's tr piped into udev random. And if I come across to the desktop and run transmission pw gen, what this does is this generates a plain text password and RPC string that you can use to set up transmission. So what I'll do is just come across, let me just push that change up. Transmission pw gen. Oops. Oh. Hang on, what we're doing. There we go. I just push that up. Today. Okay. So what I'm just going to do is come across to my GitHub thing for a funny story. So that was a let me just come across to here and come across to this file and tell you an amusing anecdote. So in a previous video, like about 5 or 6 days ago, what I did was do a video on setting up transmission on NixOS. And what I'm doing here is actually showing you the config, and then showing you the transmission password gen file. So this is the previous version, and what I was saying is, by default, there's no bin bash, so what you have to do is change the shebang to user bin environment bash. And as you can see here, what I was doing was, showing you the script, and showing you what happens when you run it. So when you run the script, you know, it's going to print out stuff like this, okay? And then you'd put it in your settings.json file. I had an email from GitHub saying that someone had complained that I had posted confidential information without their authorization. Basically, what someone was saying was that I had posted their login details for transmission. So what you can see, what basically they were saying is that I've changed the string now, but they were saying that this 49 character string and a username of username was their password. So they were saying that a password that was created with udev random, okay, with a plain text password here, a 49 character string, and a username of username were their password details. So GitHub threatened to pull down my repository because of this. So I had to fire back an email saying, you know, this is obviously bollocks. There is no way on earth that I could have accidentally generated the same 49 character password as someone else with a username of username for the exact same application. So I fired off that email, try not to get too pissed off in it. And they go, yeah, okay, yeah, we're not taking any action. But I said, you know, why are you sending me these emails when, you know, without actually looking through this? Because you can see perfectly obviously, you know, looking at this, you know, running the script, you know, this is running the script, you know, run the transmission, it will generate a password like this, and then replace your username with your username. Someone was claiming that I'd posted confidential details, and I can't believe that, you know, that's actually possible. So I don't know why that happened, but it was kind of amusing. So I just thought I'd mention it. And you know, if it was someone like, oh, you know, you've accidentally posted your password details, so you know, they'd raise an issue on GitHub saying, mate, you know, you've accidentally put in your details for transmission. It wasn't a case of that, and it wasn't a case of some automated back-end thing on GitHub. It was them specifically saying, GitHub saying, you know, someone's complained that you've posted their details. So I don't know why that was. Just someone causing a bit of mischief or being a dick. But yeah, it was kind of funny. And so I just had to point out, you know, look at the page. It's pretty obvious it's nonsense. And, you know, this repository's been up for 10 years with lots of examples of, you know, generating passwords for applications. So I just thought I'd mention that because that was a slightly amusing sort of story. So 2 weeks on Nixos. What's it like actually switching from Ubuntu to using this? Are there, you know, lots of pitfalls you're going to come across? Yeah, there are going to be a few, but nothing that can't actually be ironed out. And the advantage of Nixos over Ubuntu, I'm going to set out a couple of things. Setting up the graphics drivers on Nixos is magic. If I come across into Nixos root down here, etc., configuration, I think it is where have I got it? Yeah. So all I had to do to set up the proprietary Nvidia drivers in Nixos, when you run the configuration, it's not going to add this automatically. You've got to add this after the fact and then do a Nixos rebuild switch. All I have to do is services x server video drivers equals Nvidia, and that installs the Nvidia drivers, sets up mvenc encoding for OBS. So once I'd done this and I opened up OBS, boom, mvenc was enabled and set up by default. Magic. on Ubuntu, what you got to do is you got to kind of go into a graphical application like it's like software sources or something, and it's got like another tab called hardware tab, and then you've got to go into there and actually select the driver. And if you just used the command line to install stuff, you wouldn't even know it was there. And I didn't know that it was actually there. So I was actually running a system without the drivers installed and wondering why it was really slow. And it wasn't until one day I actually, opened up this graphical application and go, oh, it's not installed the flipping drivers. That's why it's running so hot. So on Ubuntu, you kind of got to open this separate thing. So let's see. Just show you Ubuntu, install Nvidia driver, see if it's got a screenshot somewhere. Okay, yeah, so let's see here, we've got a screenshot. Come on, today. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. Normally, you've got to open this a thing like this. Says click on additional drivers tab. You've got to go down here, and then you have to select your driver and apply the changes. And then what happens is, a new driver comes out, and then you might have to come through and select the new driver and apply it. What happened was the actual graphical user interface for selecting the drivers actually stopped working. And you couldn't upgrade to the latest driver using the GUI, so you then had to go and faff about on the command line to do stuff. And it's a real pain, basically, to do that, as opposed to in Nix, one line of code, video drivers equals Nvidia. Done. Everything's set up. Yeah. It's just so much better. It's just night and day, because as I said, I didn't even realise this was here for a while. I had to go through and select the driver, and then, what happens is, you've got to keep going through and selecting and, update, the new driver and doing it manually. So that's a real pain. So actually managing it through Nix like this is much, much better. And it works out the box. So I hadn't had any issues at all with Nvidia not working properly. So I've got NVENC set up in OBS. I've got hardware acceleration for MPV. The other thing, I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous video, is what we can also do in this configuration file is actually set up things like Gnome and disable certain features. So what you'll actually see down here is I've got sort of Gnome set up, and you'll see this little section, Gnome equals tracker miners enabled equals false. And what that does is that disables the, when you use the search feature in Gnome, the big search thing, this thing up here, type to search, it uses something called tracker miners. And this process is just running in the background, using up loads of CPU. You don't really need it, to be honest. So you can actually just disable it and reduce the load on your CPU. So that's really handy, is that rather than manually going through, you can do stuff like, I think I did a note on this. Let me see if I've got the notes. There's another way to do this if you're just running regular Ubuntu. Hang on a sec. No, not it's Nix PKGs. Nix PKGs. Come on, Nick, spell things properly. Go on. Right. Was it this one? Where did I set it up? I set it up somewhere. There's a way you can actually disable the tracker miner. Did I put it in Ubuntu? Let me just search for it. Let's rep that son of a right. RG minor. Let's search for minor. Everything in Cerberus. Okay. Sorry, I didn't find it, but I got it set up somewhere. But basically, what you got to do on Ubuntu is you got to do something like systemctl disable, and then you got to mask the service. I got it written down somewhere. I'll sort of dig it out and put the note somewhere. Can't remember what it is offhand. But basically, what you can do is to do the same thing on Ubuntu. What you got to do is on any Linux distribution, you got to stop the service and you got to mask it. Whereas actually in Nix, what we can do is actually just declare Gnome tracker miners enables false, which is actually great. So where have I got down here? And also what you can do is actually set up Gnome and remove all the packages you don't want. So you can actually set it up with no packages at all, or you can actually specifically remove certain packages from the Gnome install, like Gnome Photos, Tor, text editor, calendars, cheese, contacts, maps, Geary, character, all that kind of stuff. You can actually just disable, which is really handy. So let me close that. So is there anything else I haven't thought of? So as I said, this is Emacs. This is the latest version of Emacs, built from master. And all the packages are actually managed through Home Manager now. So when I start up Emacs, I don't have to run package update, update all the packages and then go through, and then, some of the packages haven't been updated, and then, you've got to go through and fix stuff. None of that. So typically what I'd have to do on Ubuntu is I'd run a sudo. So there's no apt on Nix either. So typically, when I'd start up the computer before, I'd run a sudo apt update, a sudo apt upgrade, then maybe I'd run something like sudo snap refresh list to see if there's any snap updates. Then I'd run flatpak -- user update. Then I'd come into Emacs and run package updates, all like that. So those are the steps I'd normally go through to actually update all the different things on the system. Now all I do is run Home Manager switch. I'm not going to run it now, but that's all I do. And what that will do is that will update all of the applications. It's going to update all the packages in Emacs. It's going to update Firefox to the latest version, so we can see here help about Firefox. We're running the latest version of Firefox 109.1. What it will also do is it will also update all these extensions as well. So rather coming through and going check for updates for extensions, when I run Home Manager switch, what it's going to do is it's going to update all these extensions as well. So that's a lot easier. Running one command to update the system. And as I said, I have Nixos set to automatically update, so we've got the system is separated from the user environment. So the advantage of this is, the system's automatically updated using the configuration.nix, and when it's going to check for an update. When I reboot, it's going to go into that new update. If there's any problems, I can go into the previous version. And then I've got Home Manager to actually manage the desktop side of things. So files. So this is a org document, and what I do is this contains all the configuration for all the applications. So I still manage my doc files through Emacs, but an org mode. But I actually have everything set up using Home Manager. So we've got Home Manager, which I should show you, configuration.nix. What that does is we've got this section in here, allow free true, package overrides, and we've got ner. What the fuck is the ner? You've heard of the R, the Arch user repository. This is the same thing. It's the Nix user repository, and what it does is it has collections of things generated by the community that you can install, such as browser extensions. So we have this in our configuration.nix. Then we've got our home.nix here, which I showed you. We've got the Firefox.nix. And this is, you can see here this section, extensions with PKG, ner, repos, RIC, Firefox add-ons. This is how we actually install our browser add-ons. So that's the Firefox Nix. Then what we've got down here, which is flipping awesome, is Dconf. So what this is setting up all the options that you would normally set up in Dconf or Gnome Tweaks. So let's come across, have I got Dconf. So Dconf. So typically what you do is you'd come through and you'd open up Dconf and you go through all these different settings, turn things on and off. But what you can do with Nix and Home Manager, and again, I'm not completely sure if you can use set this Dconf stuff up on any version of Linux. Maybe you can only do this on Nix OS. Is you can actually specify all the Dconf settings that you want to change. So color theme dark, input sources, set up the clock, disable animation, disable natural scrolling, that stupid Apple thing where everything goes arse to tits, wrong way round. We can change all our key bindings here. So we can change all the key bindings for Gnome. We can set all the options for Mutter, like centering new windows, dynamic workspaces, the overlay key. We can set up keys for media, like Alt Super Space to pause and play videos. All the power settings, preferred dark, all these kind of different settings that you'd normally have to go through and apply manually. You can actually do programmatically and have them all applied so that you've got a really clean sort of setup with all the options you want enabled. So normally you'd come through and you'd set that all up in Dconf. Now the question is, how do you know what settings you've changed in Dconf? Dump. Massive dumps, that's what it is. Dconf dump / I think this is it, if I can remember, dconf. I'll just call it dconf.conf. Okay, let's come across to desktop, dconf. And what you'll see here is these are all of the settings from Dconf. And so what you basically do is, when you're going to transition to Nix, you've got everything set up, in Dconf and in Gnome Tweaks and that sort of thing. And basically, all you do, you'd run this dconf dump / redirect it into a text file, and you will have a list of all the Dconf settings that you've changed. So rather than you going through and going, okay, so like, rather than you being a Luddite and coming through and going, okay, if I change something in Control Center, if I change something, is it in, Gnome Shell, or is it in Gnome Desktop and WM and preferences? Trying to go through, find stuff like that manually. Sod that. dump it out. You've got a list of all the changes that you've actually made. What you then need to do is you actually have to change this format to actually get it to work with Nixos. So you've got a list of all the options, and what we have to do is change them slightly. So as you can see, it's a slightly different configuration, but what you'll see here is what we've got is dconf settings, and actually the path, curly braces, and then the options inside. So like color scheme, prefer dark here. So org gnome desktop input sources, dconf setting, org gnome desktop input sources, color scheme, prefer dark. Same deal, different kind of layout, but you can see this isn't a difficult layout to a difficult kind of language to get your head around. Pretty straightforward, just the path with the option inside it. So as I say, what you do, you dump your dconf, you go through, and you make a note of these settings like this. You just create a new thing. So desktop input sources, prefer dark, interface. So you just go through. So like we've got touchpad here. So let's come through and search for touchpad. So you can see here, org gnome desktop peripherals touchpad, natural scroll false, 2-finger scroll enabled true. Same deal down here, org gnome desktop peripherals touchpad, natural scroll false, 2-finger scroll enabled true. So this is awesome, because what it means is, rather than going through and manually changing all these settings and going through lots of different things in dconf or gnome tweaks, you dump them out, you put them in a file. When you rebuild you run home manager switch, it's going to set everything up for you. So all the options in settings will automatically be sort of enabled, like appearance, prefer dark theme, all the keyboard settings, changed all the keyboard settings. And normally what happens is when you change the keyboard setting in here, it's going to show up as modified. But because we've directly modified the dconf settings, they're just showing up as unmodified, because they're now the default that we've chosen, if that kind of makes sense. So that's awesome. And as you can see, if I pull back here, you can see we've got a really minimal system. We've removed all the GNOME crap. So basically we've got Alacrity, Emacs, Firefox, OBS, and we've got our utilities, settings, dconf, tweaks, disks, that sort of thing. And just general stuff in here, Nix manual, MPV. We've got the Nvidia settings. So the Nvidia settings work out the box. No faffing about, amazing. So as I said, you can have everything nice and clean. Remove all the craft that you don't want from GNOME. You don't have to faff about with all this setting up graphics drivers and then finding out the GUI stopped working, and then you got to do it manually. You got to search to figure out how to manually, apply the driver settings. So that's a real advantage. So as I say, 2 weeks on Nixos switching from Ubuntu wasn't too difficult. There's a few little things you got to go through and sort of manually set up, but by and large, this is a better system than Ubuntu, because you can see here I've got the latest version of GNOME with all the nice stuff down here, and we don't have all the Ubuntu branding. We don't have the dock, no dock here, so we're not being forced to have the dock, and there's no snaps. Okay, so there's another advantage. You've got no snaps, anything like that. So the advantage is that it's a bit like, as an analogy, you got your Android. Google phones, your Pixel, which is totally unbranded, pure Android. Then you'll get a Samsung phone, and they'll put all their crap on it, all their bloatware. It's kind of the same with Ubuntu. Is that Ubuntu kind of puts its own bloat or its own spin on stuff, and you're kind of at mercy of what they think you should be doing, or you should be using, or how you should be using it. The other thing is, where is it? At news Reddit. So typically, what happens in apt, what they do is you've now got this new thing in apt when you run apt on Ubuntu, is that it's actually putting up news inside of apt. Yeah, so you run sudo apt update, and it will get you'll get this news section down here. And what you've got to do is in the config somewhere you've got to set apt_news false to actually hide this from apt. But apparently there's a new apt news message promoting Ubuntu Pro or something that comes up that you can't actually disable with that apt news equals false. So every time you're running apt on Ubuntu, you're getting this forced kind of news forced down your throat. And it seems like one of the latest things you can't actually disable. So that's really annoying. And that's just another little thing that, irks me, and that you kind of got to sort of get around and disable. And it's like, do I really want to use something that is pushing this stuff on me and pushing snaps and that sort of thing? So that's another annoying thing about Ubuntu. Ubuntu is fine, it's got its benefits. You can stick it in any machine and it'll, it's going to work pretty much. But it's, the LTS has got older software, and it can be a bit of a pain. So actually having Nix means I'm running the latest versions of Emacs. So this is all built from source, pure GTK Wayland version of Emacs. Everything's all set up. So basically, if I come across here and close that, git Nixos XPS 15. So literally, my system is now managed by 2 text files. So it's managed by 2 org documents. So I've got my this is the root configuration. So we've got the configuration.nix here, and we've got the hardware.nix here. And what we do is we've got the block of code in here. And this is another thing I wanted to mention, is there's actually a mode in Emacs for Nix syntax highlighting. So you can see here in this org block, begin source Nix, and everything's nice and highlighted. So the way that I handle this is I have an org document here with the configuration, and then what I do is I tangle it. What this does is this writes out that source code block to this location using sudo. So if I run, what was it, Control-C on this block, it's going to prompt me for the password, and it's then going to write out that configuration to etc nixos configuration.nix. So basically what I do is when I want to make a change, I just edit this document, edit the source code block, come across, then tangle the file into the directory. So I don't actually have to edit that file manually. I don't have to go to, etc nixos configuration.nix. And also this means that I've got multiple levels of backup as well. So that's how I handle the root of my system. And again, as I showed you, let me just show you in here again one last time. We've got the system auto upgrade equals true. But I don't actually have to do anything to actually manage the system. It's just going to automatically upgrade when there's upgrades. Yeah, so it's going to check there's an upgrade. Remember, don't put allow reboot true, because it will just reboot probably while you're in the middle of doing something really important. You could set it to dates, 4 o'clock in the morning if you have your computer on like that. But basically, the configuration for the system's just automatically updated in the back end. So it will run an update. It will create a sort of new generation, and then when I reboot, boom, I'm just it's updated. So I don't have to do. There's no updates for the system. So the advantage of this is that that's the root. So the root is taken care of completely. So the system and the user side are totally separate. And everything's self-contained, doesn't interfere with each other. So all I have to do is actually manage my home from the single dot file now, from this single org file. So all I got to do is I've basically kind of got a dashboard of all the applications I've got installed here. I just come through, edit stuff, and then I tangle stuff. And what the advantage of this is this is all kept under Git. And as you can see, tangle document. So I can run Control-C, Control-V-T, and it's going to tangle the entire document and write out all the source code blocks to all the locations specified. So what that means is when I might go through, change something, change some options in some of these things, push them up the Git, and on my second computer, all I've got to do is pull down the changes, open up this file, and then tangle the document. And what it's going to do is write out all the configuration to these locations. So you can see what we have is a two-step thing. We specify the source code block, and then we have the tangle section. And what that does is that writes out that source code block to these locations. So you can see here init.el, and that's init.el. So this is no web. So what we're doing is we're creating a named block called init.el, and then instead of putting the configuration in multiple places down here, we can just reference it, and we can just say begin source, and then tangle to this location. And so what you can see here is I actually tangle it to 2 different locations. I tangle it to ~dot config emacs init.el, and then to the current directory .config emacs init.el. Let me just come into there. Hang on. So what you can see here is actually writing out the files to 2 locations. So the reason for that is multiple levels of backup means that I've got the files in the correct location in the file system. I've got them in this org file, but also I have the directory structure actually written out here, so that if need be, I can actually just grab the files as well. So we've got multiple levels of redundancy. So we've got everything there, and then actually in this file. So the advantage of this is now literally this whole system is managed by this single text file, because the other text file, the configuration, that's just automatically updated. So all I've got to do to manage all the settings on my system, all the applications, the config files, the settings for Firefox, for Dconf, for the desktop, all managed through this. Just come through, edit stuff, push up the changes, and then all you have to do is pull down the latest changes on another machine, open up this file, run Control-C, Control-V-T, boom, tangles all of the source code blocks into the correct location. And what this means is literally all I got to do is do a git pull, run that command, it's updated all the dot files, and then on the other machine all I do is run home manager switch, and it's going to update everything. So this is about as simple as it gets to sort of managing your system. And the really nice thing about this is it forces you to actually keep a note of all the changes. And as I say, there's multiple places that you go through and change stuff. As I said, for going through changing all the Firefox stuff, changing the XDG directories to get rid of the templates and public folders, the setting the default layout for the file manager, all that kind of stuff, rather than having it all scattered across the place and then you having to go through and manually change all these things by going to those different file locations. You can just manage it from one org document. And again, the nice thing, if I go into Home Manager here, you can see begin source Nix. So we've got the syntax highlighting for Nix, and I think, let me just check in Emacs what that package was. No, it's actually in Home Manager, isn't it? Because Home Manager is managing my Emacs stuff now. So what was that? I think it's called Nix mode. Yeah, that's it. That's the one you want, Nix mode. So that provides the syntax highlighting and the Nix block for Emacs, as it were. So that's just some things that I've come across with NixOS as a daily driver after 2 weeks. And as I said, there's a little bit of things you kind of got to go through and set up manually, even after the fact, a few little tweaks here and there, but it takes out the majority of stuff that, you'd actually go through and sort of do manually. So just a couple of recaps. The dconf dump, again, all you do to dump your dconf settings, dconf dump / redirect into a text file like that. Conf. So that's how you dump all your dconf settings. So you can see everything you've changed in there. Some of the things you might even be able to, I'm not sure if you can actually, you see how you've got this sort of layout here. I think that's also stored in dconf, the actual sort of favorite extensions, that sort of thing. So you could probably even automate the layout of that. But basically you can come through all your dconf settings and actually use them in Nix. But this also might be useful if you just want to keep a backup of your dconf settings. All the things like you can see here, got input sources. So this is useful for setting things like keyboard layout. So when you're switching keys or specifying a keyboard layout like Mac, and you want to swap like left control and left alt, that kind of thing, you can set all the XDG KB options up. Set up all the options for the desktop, preferring dark, disabling animations, the font hinting, all that kind of stuff. So that was the sort of the dconf thing, and the Gnome thing was, let's go back to the doc files and go back to Firefox. Unified. Okay, so that's the one you want. Get rid of the button. Remember about config. Paste that in. Change it. It's going to be true. You change it to false. Then it comes up with, if I just go through it again, yeah. When you change it back to true, you open a new window. You get this. And what you got to do. So that's it, true. So what we have to do is we change it to false. We then had the overflow menu. If I just open customize toolbar, so you can see the overflow menu comes up here, and what happens is you disable it, and then you get the chevrons, so you go to Customize Toolbar, drag that out, you click Done, and the button's gone. Okay, so there's a couple of stage process for that. That's how you remove the unified button extension. And again, there was the XDG directories. So remember, we had the XDG directories that we can actually remove. And again, you can change any of the XDG default things. So let's have a quick let's XDG. Oh, let's go to Arch Wiki XDG. I think it was. Yeah, user directories. Again, this is the section config user directories.dirs. This is the default you've got here with public and templates. So if you're on another Linux distribution or GNOME or something, just edit that file, remove the ones you don't want, like that. And again, you can change the sort of location of any of these. So for instance, again, your default music directory is going to be home music. You could change that to an external drive just by putting it in a different file path. So this is useful. You want to change suppose you want to change all the names of these to lowercase, you could do that. You can remove the ones you don't want. You could change that to fuck nuts or whatever. So that's really useful. And once you've done that, you can delete the unused directories. And when you reboot, they're not going to be recreated. So that's about an hour and a half. I think that's probably enough. But have a look through the Nix manual. And one really funny thing is Kai Hendry, a guy on YouTube, was actually trying to install Nix, and he completely missed the step of actually going through and generating the configuration files. So there's like about a 45-minute video of him where he basically skips to the configuration step. So he completely misses the actual installing NixOS and goes to the jumps down here and keeps going, why haven't I got this file? Which is quite amusing. So make sure you actually read this documentation. But basically, there's two ways to install Nix. I did it the easy way of just using the installer, which is fine. But basically, the end result is either if you use the GUI installer or the command line, you're going to end up with two text files, configuration and hardware configuration.nix. And that's used to actually build the system. And then we've got Home Manager, which we're using to install the applications and configure things like the desktop. And the reason why we keep those separate is because we don't want to put all the applications in the system files, because then if we wanted to install a new application, it's going to rebuild the system as well. So that's why we keep them separate. And that's really nice, because that just means all I have to do to update my entire system now is run Home Manager switch. That's it. So a run Home Manager switch, and what it's going to do is actually going to download the latest version of Emacs and build it. It's going to update all the extensions, all the applications, and that's it. There's no apps, there's no snaps to worry about. You can use Flatpak if you want, but it doesn't get much simpler than this to managing your system. The system's auto upgraded, so all I've got to do is run Home Manager switch. And again, with Home Manager and NixOS, you can always roll back if something's broken. But so far, I haven't had any issues. But as I said, there are a few weird glitches with Alacrity that you're going to come across. As I said, I recommend setting it up to go full screen like this, because as you can see, if I bring this out here, you can see you got this weird thing where the title bar, you can see it, now you can't, now you can see it, now you can't. You have a weird thing with the title bar sometimes disappearing, and The other issue is it's not doing it here, but if I was to set this to maximize, what would happen is you'd expect it to be like this. It doesn't. It will maximize the width, but not the height. So what will happen, if you set it to maximize, it's going to be maximized to the width, but not the height. It'll be a half screen window for some God knows reason. So that's why I recommend setting up Alacrity just to open full screen like that. And if I take it out, you can see how the bars like disappearing. So you do get some weird issues. And again, the other weird issue is if you're in this mode and you set to go to full screen like that, you get this effect like that. Weird. And that's just an Alacrity Wayland kind of issue, but just something I came across and wanted to mention. So I would definitely recommend switching to Nix. It's a bit like combining the package availability of Arch Linux with the clean userland of FreeBSD with an obscure language like Haskell, which is used to configure sort of Xmonad. Is the same kind of functional sort of programmable, the same kind of, it's not written in Haskell, but it's the same kind of gist, if you get my drift. So that's what it's kind of like. It's kind of like a sort of amalgamation of those sort of things, but it's really good. And I'd recommend, if you have any issues on any other distro, it's definitely worth a look, because you get the latest and greatest software. You get a stable system. You can roll back, and you've got everything managed from configuration files. So it really forces you to keep everything really nice and clean, which is good. And as I said, you can use Home Manager to set up loads of different stuff. You can actually use Home Manager to manage all your doc files as well. So you can just purely use Home Manager and set it up to write out all your doc files and all your configuration as well. So that's another way to do it. But I prefer to use an org document for that, because it's got nice stuff like the ability to provide different languages. So you see here, this block is Emacs Lisp, whereas Home Manager is a Nix source code block, if that makes sense. But I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. As I said, I switched to using Bash because it recognizes I get auto completion for commands prefixed with sudo, which I didn't with the ZSH, and there wasn't really anything in ZSH I ever used. I'll never write ZSH scripts. The only thing that was quite nice was the coloured highlighting when you type something wrong, but nothing that actually missing. So I think that's pretty much everything. Few little kind of minor glitches, but they're not really Nix related. That was more of a Alacrity issue. And as I said, I could never get Alacrity to work on Ubuntu 22.04. I got it installed once manually. I updated the graphics driver and it broke. So this is another nice thing about Nix, is sometimes it will actually get things working that you couldn't on other Linux distributions, because everything is self-contained in its own directory for that application. All the dependencies for the application are self-contained. So one package won't interfere with another package. So that's all for now. I'll put links to all this under the video and hope some of those tips help you out.